What is the most disturbing thing your kid has said when talking about their imaginary friend?
Closest thing I ever had to an imaginary friend that I can think of, same post from another thread, just updated with current age. I've been living in the same house I grew up in my entire life. When I was little, around 5 or 6, I used to sleep in my parents' room because I was scared to sleep alone in my room. One night, I woke up and there was a man standing in the corner wearing all black with a shaved head, big eyes, sad mouth, and big ears. He just stood there looking at me from the corner with his hands in his pockets. I close my eyes out of fear and drift off to sleep. I wake up again about 15 to 20 minutes later and the man is now standing at the foot of my bed looking at me. His face was expressionless and kind of sad. I remember feeling scared and sad at the same time. I closed my eyes again and when I opened them he was gone. When I was around 8 I started calling him, Mr. Man. This would happen about 2 times a week every week until I turned 11. I started to sleep in my own room at about the age of 9, embarrassing, I know, and Mr. Man would still show up. However, when I turned 15 he stopped. This was around the time that my grandfather Sammy passed away and at the time I thought the two were connected. I remember telling my mom about what had been going on shortly after the funeral, maybe a couple of days to a week, and she had me taken to a therapist and get evaluated and all that BS. All they found was I had high ADD and ADHD. No signs of schizophrenia, which my mom was very scared of as my father's mother was paranoid schizophrenic. I wouldn't see Mr. Man for another 4 years. When I turned 18 though I started noticing weird things happening around the house. The TV would turn on, or the volume would change rapidly, doors would open and close and I noticed our animals started to act weird. My dog Flower would bark at the hallway every now and then, or she would get up from my bed and stare at the door with her ears perked up. Our cats would get puffed up out of nowhere and hiss at nothing. I would hear footsteps walking by my room in the middle of the night. I thought it was my dad walking to the bathroom as it's right next to my room, but as I got up to see who it was, the bathroom door was open and the light off. I checked my parents' room and both were in bed. I'm 20 now and still living with my parents as I'm going to a local college. Just about a year ago he showed back up. It was in the morning around dawn and I heard my door open. I thought it might have been my dad or something, but he would usually shut the door once he saw I was still asleep. When I noticed the door wasn't shut, I woke up and turned to see a silhouette of a man looking throughout the crack in the door. At first I thought it was my dad and asked if it was him but didn't get a reply. It wasn't my dad, it was Mr. Man. This time he had a hat on. I know it was him because I noticed the big ears and eyes. He just stayed there looking at me for a good 5 minutes. I remember when I noticed I said, "Been a while, mister." And this was the first time I heard him speak. I remember he smirked and said, "It has, hasn't it?" His voice was deep and low, like James Earl Jones. Then the door slammed and he was gone. Weird stuff still happens all the time. My dad is just now starting to admit something weird is happening. Just last week we talked about it and he says he used to hear whispering at night and footsteps.
My son had an imaginary friend when he was around 2 or 3. He would talk to him in his room and ask to go up to his room to play with Boot, his imaginary friend's name. I just brushed it off until I told my husband one day and he was stunned. His little brother who died at the age of 9 was nicknamed Boot, something I didn't know.
My ex-wife's brother has a couple of twin girls that are really very unusual. Among other things, both grandparents on his side have been dead the whole time they've been alive, and when shown a picture of them, they said, "Oh, we know them, they play with us all the time." Also, this happens all the time with them talking to things that aren't there, together. I have a pic on my phone my ex sent me that someone took of them at the lake and one of them is sitting down in mid-air, and when her dad asked what was up with the picture she said, "The lady said it was slippery and told me to sit on her lap so I wouldn't fall in."
My 4-year-old son had a friend named Jay Keys. He told us he was 13 years old and that he had died in a train crash in 1893. My son was always talking about him so naturally, with how specific he was. My husband and I did a little research. We found there was a train accident in that year, in our area, with multiple people with the first name starting with AJ who had been killed.
Little cousin Samantha had an imaginary friend named Charlotte who wouldn't come out of Samantha's room. When we asked Sam why she wouldn't come out, she would only say that she couldn't. She was stuck, but would never say exactly why. We asked Sam what Charlotte looked like, and she said she didn't have any skin. Later, we were all discussing Charlotte in front of Grandma, who gets dead serious and says, "You know that house burnt down a long time ago, and the youngest daughter Charlotte was trapped inside and died." Everyone just looked at each other. I was so creeped out I wouldn't go back to the house. My niece had an imaginary friend, said she wasn't allowed to tell her mom her name though, because the friend said her mom would get scared if she knew it. Never told my sister-in-law, her mother, her friend's name. Then one day her mom was in the hallway and my niece didn't realize it and called her friend by name. Her name was Molly. Now this doesn't sound creepy, until you realize that my sister-in-law's grandmom's name was Molly and she died when my niece was only about 1 year old. The name was never mentioned because my sister-in-law took her death horribly since they were extremely close. My niece knew nothing about this grandmom and had no reason to know the name or that it would affect her mother. Still creeps everyone out to this day.
When I was little, I had an imaginary friend. She, not sure if it had a gender, was very tall, extraordinarily thin, think anorexic thin, had a large, beak-like nose, and dark skin. She would wear a red knit cap, sweater, and sweatpants. I remember waking up every night and seeing her sitting on the foot of my bed, and all she did was complain about how miserable life was. I'd eventually run out to my parents, and she'd yell, "Please don't leave me." When I was 3.5, we moved. She told me she was going to kill herself, and she would really do it this time, because I was leaving her forever. Never saw her again. Edit, for those of you who haven't heard of it, sleep paralysis can lead to some crazy visions like this. My symptoms did not match sleep paralysis, since I was able to run away, but it's still an interesting read.
Thank you for watching. Please leave your comments, suggestions and requests below.